Welcome everybody to episode 3 of season 3 of our Spotlight series. We are very lucky to have Holly with us, and we're especially lucky because she is fighting a bit of a cold at the moment, and she's powered by Lemsip, but she's here tonight to answer all of the amazing questions you've put in. So coming from quite a science background with a biomed BSc focusing on pharmacology and then an MRes in cancer science with some work as a research technician in there, so quite an academic science background, moving over to medicine, now a second year undergrad student at the University of Glasgow. So welcome, Holly. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Amber. It's a pleasure.
So we're going to open the episode with our question from last episode 2, which was, if you didn't want to study medicine and become a doctor, what path would you take?
So, as I mentioned, it depends when you would have asked me. When I was really young, I was really into my sports. So I thought about becoming a professional tennis player. Nice. And I was also a dancer. So I thought about becoming a professional dancer. But I suppose when I got to university, as Amber said, I did biomedical science. And so that kind of led me down more of a research path. And that was kind of, I was already at the junction where I was thinking, do I want to go into medicine or do I want to continue down that path? So I probably would have ended up doing research, and probably I was thinking about medical writing and being an editor for journals. So that was the alternative.
Yeah, okay, so quite a few, like, quite different paths there.
Yeah.
And is the sport something that you, I mean, we'll talk about it more later, but something that you do in your spare time still?
To a degree, yeah. I haven't played tennis in a few years.
Yeah.
But no, I definitely use it as a way to balance my studies and life generally, and to de-stress when, especially during exam season, for example. But no, as I mentioned, it's now just running. It's a lot of running, and yeah, getting involved in sports when I can.
Okay, so you said that the biomedical sciences led you more to a science career. So how did that then become medicine? When did medicine pop up in the timeline?
So medicine was always in the timeline. I think from the age of 12 or 13, I was like, oh yeah, maybe I want to do that. And I was working towards it at school. But I didn't get the grades from school. So I couldn't apply straight, which kind of led me into the let's go and do biomedical science route. And I started that with the intention of then going on and doing medicine as a graduate. Fast forward until my last year, and I applied. That was the first time I really applied to medicine, but I got rejected from all 4 schools at that point. So that pushed me into the research career. And it wasn't until COVID that I reconsidered doing medicine. And it was working, the specific kind of setting that caused that kind of question in my head was I was working in the COVID testing lab. And I think it was more the environment that I was in, meeting people from lots of different backgrounds, knowing that the work I was doing was having a real impact on the here and now. That was what kind of spurred me to go, you know what, I'm going to reconsider medicine. I suppose it was in my mind the whole time, as I said, and I was quite lucky because the job I was in at the time, being a lab technician, my boss was a surgeon. A lot of the other fellow researchers I was around were surgeons. So it was kind of, I don't know if it's the best expression, but like drip fed into me. They were talking a lot about patients and a lot about clinic. So it was in the back of my mind the whole time. And I think that was a really good kind of gateway because I got to speak to them a lot about it and their experiences in it. But yeah, it was at the time of COVID where I was like, is research really what I want to do? And it was the experience of working in the lab that made me go, you know what, I actually don't want to be in research. I want to be patient facing. And it also gave me the confidence to reapply after being rejected, because I was able to kind of do a bit of leadership in the smaller teams that were in the lab and talk to people about it. And yeah, I suppose that's what led me to finally make the jump and do it again, go through the process a second time.
Yeah, and I think that's, the confidence is a huge thing. I think it's daunting at the best of times, you know, and having to kind of have the
Yes.
determination to go through one cycle, not be successful, and then, you know, especially with COVID as well, it was probably a big change in a lot of like other aspects as well.
Yeah.
So kind of your first application was, did you do that during your final year? So you kind of prepared for that during the final year?
Yeah.
And you,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was interesting. I remember having a supervisor at the time who I obviously spoke to about my intentions to go and apply. And she'd done medicine. She'd actually done the opposite. She'd started in medicine and then gone into research. So it was really interesting to have that perspective. And I remember her saying, when I was talking about what project I was going to do for my dissertation, I remember her saying, you know, Holly, if you're serious about medicine, then I know that it might seem um, a bit, I was going to say anti-intuitive, like it might not seem the most obvious choice to do a research project,
Mm-hmm.
but you might want to consider it because what if you don't get in? Um, so she was really encouraging, but she was also very realistic. And actually, in hindsight, that was a good thing. It was a really good thing to have that. But yeah, she was able to kind of speak me through the process, and she was very, yeah, she was very supportive, but
Mm-hmm.
very aware of the challenges. So it was good to have. It was good to have that kind of at that time as well. It really prepared me for the rejection, I suppose, in the best way that it could.
Yeah, and I suppose it's tricky from the point of view of giving advice because you want to be encouraging and but
Yeah.
so it is really competitive, and you know, great candidates don't get in. So it's having that kind of that plan. How was it kind of in your head reconciling thinking about, you know, trying to, because you have to give so much to the application, but then also having a different avenue in your head of thinking, you know, what would you do otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I completely relate to that. I think my way of kind of coping with that was that I actually kept it to myself for a long time. I kept it close to me, so that
Mm-hmm.
not a lot of people knew that I was applying. And I think that was my way of keeping a realistic view on things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think, yeah, it's a tricky one because you need encouragement, as you say, but you need to be aware that it might not happen. And I think I'd spend a lot of time going through my mind of what if it doesn't? Like, what are my alternatives? You know, it's I can go down. The good thing about biomed, I suppose, is that you can go down so many avenues, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd watched people go down so many. So I think the perspective of it's not going to be the end if I don't get in is a pretty good kind of starting point for that, if that makes sense. I think
Yeah.
it's really difficult to foster that, but I think having done my master's and then done something a little bit different helped because I was like, it's not, life doesn't just stop. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you can figure things out. Um, and then I remember thinking, I've got kind of this time that I'm going to try, and I'll give myself another 2 times to try. And I remember kind of putting that timeline on it and really thinking, how am I going to do this strategically? Um, and again, it just to manage my own, that kind of might help to manage my own expectations on it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and I think it's because it takes so much to like go through the process and the nerves, it's a tricky thing to keep a balance. But it sounds like, you know, you were quite rational and quite, you know, kind of had the options set up there. And in terms of applying, you were applying to the kind of the four Scottish schools, is that right? Is that kind of those where your options were?
Yeah, um, yeah. So I applied to Aberdeen, Dundee, St Andrews, and Glasgow,
Mhm. Yeah.
of course. So I didn't apply to Edinburgh. That was the only one I didn't. And it was interesting though because I'm pretty sure those are the same four I applied for the first time around. So I didn't really change my mind. And I guess in terms of doing the research about the medical schools, that bit, all the time that you spend doing that, for me, that was set.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I applied, and all of the courses I applied for were the undergraduate ones. Because I don't know if you're aware, but in Scotland there's only the one graduate course
Mhm.
out of St Andrews, and
Mhm.
the challenging thing with that is that it's split between St Andrews and Dundee, so it's 2 years in one and 2 years in the other. So that brings a lot more consideration into the equation for graduates in terms of, is that a realistic option?
Mhm.
How does that impact your personal life
Mhm.
and situation? So no, the first time I was like, I'm just going to go for all undergraduate courses and see what happens with that.
Mhm. And if you're happy to talk about it a bit, the fee structure in Scotland, if you're like a Scottish resident, it's a bit more accessible, I think, than some of the like English courses for people.
Yeah, so in Scotland, you get, as a Scottish resident, you get your first degree paid.
Mhm.
But I still have to pay for the second. I think it's
Mhm.
more accessible in terms of the fact that just the fees per year are significantly less.
Okay.
Um, there are grants,
Mhm.
but I was speaking to a friend about this the other day. They're really not very big,
Mhm.
and they're quite limited in when you can apply. So I'm quite fortunate that I didn't have to really look into it that much going into medicine. I know that's a barrier for a lot of people.
Mhm.
Um, but now that I'm where I am, I've been trying to see if there's anything available to me, and it's very little. And I was kind of surprised. I thought, I know there's not much, but I would have thought the things that the grants that there are would be more substantial.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's tricky. It's not just the fees for like 1 year or 2 years or
Mhm.
three. It's 5 plus the exams plus the equipment that I think is, yeah, when you sit with that, it's quite a lot of it's a lot of financial burden for people. And it's sad actually, because I think a lot of people uh, wouldn't be able to do it, or would, yeah,
Would love to, but
would
then
love to do it but
yeah,
can't. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And they kind of suppose, have you seen much about the apprenticeship scheme coming in? Because I've been seeing bits about it, but I didn't know if that was a like a legitimate viable entry for, say, mature students or students from previous degrees to enter in.
I honestly don't. I honestly haven't read much about it either. I've spoken to people about the benefits of having that sort of system,
Mhm.
and especially amongst uh, grads, we think that that would be a really good thing to have.
Mhm.
But I also kind of understand the complexity of putting something like that in place. And we already, I don't know how it is down south, but there's already the talk of how do we fit all of these students into placements? How do we
Mhm.
give them all of the experience that they need? So if that is the only if that's the core of the course, how is that going to be kind of facilitated? I think it's a really big question, but definitely an important one. And it'll be interesting. I think it'll be super interesting to see how that, if that gets rolled out, and how it does
Mhm.
in
Yeah,
the
I think
next few years.
yeah, already with med student places, the
Mm.
placements are jam-packed with students
Yeah.
and then with the kind of inverse staffing challenges for then
Yeah.
having people that have got the capacity and the time to take on a student to teach them, it adds time pressure, it adds so it's already, I'd say, at quite near its capacity point for housing students in the hospital.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. So do you there was what do you think the difference was between your first application and your second? Like, did you do much in between? Was it just a bit of kind of luck of the draw sometimes as well? Or, what do you think was different?
Um, I think the main difference was the UCAT,
Yep.
the entrance exam, for those who don't know.
Mhm.
I remember, I think I underestimated the challenges that that was going to bring.
Mhm.
Pardon me. Um, and it's honestly as simple as I didn't give myself enough time to prepare. And I think it was partly the fact that I suppose it's challenging because it is such an abstract exam, and you don't do any other kind of exam like that at school. And it's difficult to remind yourself, like, why am I doing this? This doesn't seem relevant. And you're going through all these questions, or this was my experience anyway. You're going through all these questions, and you're like, what has this got to do with it? And I think I got frustrated, to be honest. And I think the second time I did it, I saw it more as I have to get through this hoop. Like, this is not a assessment of how good a doctor I'm going to be in the future. This is just a hoop I've got to get through to get to where I want to go. And I think it was that kind of perspective that was the main difference, if I'm honest.
Mhm.
Um, and I think perhaps in terms of like how I approached the whole reapplication,
Mhm.
um, I don't want to say I was less stressed because it was quite a lot, but I think I just had more perspective,
Mhm.
which I think is quite a powerful thing when as you said before, it's such a long process, and it's kind of, they say that medicine's a marathon, but it really starts before you even apply. I think it's a whole, the whole process is just long, so you've got to be able to keep yourself going and motivate yourself through a pretty long process. And I think that comes with, in my experience, that came with just having, yeah, having time to consider it and think about it and doing something else, getting perspective on the whole
Mhm.
setup.
Yeah. And I suppose maybe said earlier that the pressure of having applied once, but actually, really what's the worst case of applying is
Mm,
you're unsuccessful, you don't get a place. Where actually that happened and you were fine, like it was okay. No, it wasn't what
yeah,
you wanted, but it was okay. And life
yeah,
goes on and there's other options. So like, do you think perhaps having had that, it when you were going into the next application, it kind of took a bit of pressure off?
yeah, yeah. I think so, definitely. Um, yeah, I remember thinking, when I remember going right back to being at school and getting my grades for school. I remember that very overwhelming feeling of my whole life is done. I can't apply to medicine. My whole life is done, and it does. I completely relate because as I say, I felt that myself. But then the second time, as you say, like not having that kind of made me. I was able to kind of keep myself on a straight and narrow and remind myself of why I want to do it. And I suppose the other thing is I knew the second time 100%, 110% that
Mhm.
this was what I wanted.
Yeah.
You know, and as much as I thought it's what I wanted for so long, having done a career that was related but not medicine, and
Mhm.
then realizing, no, that's definitely not it, it just kind of consolidates the fact that this is the thing that I want to do, and it's the thing that um, I'll put all my effort in.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's the thing at the end of the day that I just did. I just put absolutely everything I've got, and hoped for,
Mhm.
hoped for the best, trusted the process, but yeah, really hoped for the best there.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
lucky, was very lucky to have the support I had because it is long.
Yeah, it is. And I think, hopefully that's a lot of the reason why sharing these stories and trying to connect people that are thinking of applying, just a little bit of that connection of there's other people. It is hard, but there's people out there going through
Mm,
it. People have done it, and other people can follow in that path as well.
yeah,
But I think it is so hard to know like what medicine actually entails as a job, and that's then not even including the huge diversity within the career that you can go into. But yeah, for
yeah,
you saying, you've got all these hopes on your exam results, and like you said, it feels like the end of the world. And really, for a job that was more of an idea, perhaps, I don't know if that's fair to say, like an idea of a job rather than an actual concrete sense of what even the working world is like, or what skills you would get. It's such a like a well, a huge thing for a lot of people, but kind of
yeah.
as you're a bit further forward, a strange thing looking back on maybe.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. So you said you put everything into the application.
Hmm.
How, like, what do you think your kind of experiences in the lab and talking to people, like, how did you get that through into the application?
That's a really, it's a really good question. Um, I I think I spent a lot of time, when I was writing my statement, I spent a lot of time thinking what were kind of the best examples of the skills that I was aware that they wanted to see. Like I did a lot of, and it sounds it's really cheesy, but I did a lot of reflection on what how could I use experience from the lab to demonstrate the range of skills, and really cherry picked scenarios or situations that I was in. And I think that came. I hope I hope that came through an interview. And I was asked a little bit about how did your experience as a technician um, prepare, or yeah, how did that give you skills that you think a doctor needs? And so yeah, I think I was very selective about
Mm.
which examples I picked, and I was also very specific. So I really um, or I had detail in there of why I thought they were relevant.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's a really good question actually.
Yeah, well, I think sometimes it's really hard, especially when you start gaining more experiences. Part of you
Yeah,
wants to get them all in, and it maybe turns into a
yeah,
bit of a list of, and I've done this, and I've done this, and I've been on this project, but then you lose the detail, like you said, of the reflection of why
mm,
you think those things are so important. So I think it's the kind of the more experience you get, it becomes easier in the sense you've got things to talk about, but especially when such a limit as the personal statement. Um, and then,
so
you know,
short.
yeah, and for things to apply for maybe in the future, to trying to condense it down, but show that reflection and that insight into those experiences. Okay, it's a tricky balance. So, it obviously worked really well. You got your place. So I think it's always good to hear how people manage to harness that experience and turn it into really getting across why you're
Mm.
suitable and your motivations. Um,
I think I think as well, you know, the one thing that I kind of didn't do the first time was think outside of like medical related experiences.
mhm,
And actually like just kind of drawing on hobbies as well and what you've learned from. I know they tell you that to talk about extracurricular, but there's so many interpersonal like qualities, resilience, problem solving that you can draw on that are not from a day at the GP. And I think I did that a lot more than I thought I would. You know,
mhm.
initially I was like, oh, they want to hear about all my medical related things. And actually, I think I didn't. I obviously spoke about days at GPs and first aid that I'd done, but also the kind of hobbies that I had and why they gave me the characteristics that they were looking for. And it's just as valid. I think that's the other thing I wanted to say. It's just as valid doing it that way than drawing from medical experience, so to speak.
Yeah, and I suppose you lean on the experience you've got, and you were a competitive sports person, so that you had those experiences to draw into, and
Mm-hmm.
and maybe there's an element of the pressure of being everything to every, in every arena, like a competitive sports
Yeah,
person, the classic of a grade 8, musician, and then, academically capable. But I think again, it's showing insight into the experiences you've had as to
yeah,
why they're important, rather than just being the best at that. What's,
yeah,
even if you just play in a local league on a Sunday at a sport, it's, well, actually, what has that shown you, or what does that, mean to you? So
yeah,
it's the getting the most out of it and writing a little list all about yourself and getting points out of it.
yeah. No, I think it's important to consider beyond the medical field, so to speak.
Because you did have quite a range of experiences with the kind of the research technician kind of during COVID time, and you mentioned some patient transport as well, and like first aid roles. So really quite a diverse set of roles. Was that kind of with the mind to boost a medical CV, or was there other elements of those roles that you were interested in?
Um, I think a lot of them started for sure with the intention to boost a medical CV. Um, First aid started when I was at a university the first time, and I just loved it. And that was my stress relief. It was my socializing. It was my skill building. It was absolutely everything. Um, so I think I think a lot of them I'd I had in the back of my mind that they would be beneficial, but a lot of them were maintained because they were great fun and they gave balance as well. So yeah, um, I also did a bit of I do a bit of volunteering as well. So that's with the Girl Guides, and that again was one of those things that I was like, oh, that would be good to have, and I'd probably get a little bit of leadership from it. But I still do that again, and actually, it's still a highlight of my week. It's just something different. Um, so yeah, I think it's important to keep those things going, especially if you enjoy them. Just because you've kind of gone into medical school and it is a lot, I
Mhm.
think it can be quite overwhelming. But I think all of those experiences are very valuable throughout medicine. So that's what I found.
Yeah. So we've started to move into now medicine now as a course. So you're in your second year now. How has it been? Is it what you thought it was going to be? Like, how's it?
Um, in some ways, it's what I thought it was going to be. With the intensity of it, it was definitely brought that element.
Mhm.
Um, we were speaking a little bit earlier about kind of the structure at Glasgow. The first 2 years, 2.5 years, really is very heavy on the theory and lectures and seminars and things. Um, and then the later years are the clinical. Um, so I suppose that it has been what I expected. I'm currently doing a SSC, so all of the students in second year have their student selected component.
Mhm.
Um, and mine's looking at social determinants of health. So that's quite different. And
Mhm.
I hadn't really considered that as such a vital part of medicine.
Mhm.
So that's been a really big eye opener. And I guess you could say that's not what I expected medicine to be.
Mhm.
At least not I didn't expect it to have as much of a influence on our health, which sounds silly now, but
Mhm.
as it does, as I've learned it does. So yeah, you learn a lot that you don't expect to learn. You get to speak to a lot of. We've been lucky that we've had a few clinical days, and you get to speak to a lot of people and um, learn through patients' experience.
Mhm.
I think that's possibly the most valuable part of it. Um, but the intensity of it, I think, is quite difficult to quantify until you're there. But it is definitely it's definitely delivered in terms of how much information comes at you and the speed at which it comes at you.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess on the back of that, you've got to be so adaptable, and you've got to re learn how you learn.
Mhm.
So and practice revision in different ways. So that's been a bit of a challenge because I thought I knew that, and it turns out I only knew that for biomed. I don't know that for medicine. I've got to do that again.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
completely similar. Thought I was like, oh, I've got so much learning experience, and yeah, it didn't really. So obviously some things came across, but
yeah.
yeah. And what were the main differences, do you think, or how have you adapted your learning style?
Well, it's just a lot more information, and
Mhm.
I've kind of, I don't know about you, but I was very much just repeat my notes, read through, highlight, repeat my notes. And even in the first semester, I was talking to the head of the year, and she just came out and she was like, Holly, even if I know that works, but you can't do that. It's not feasible. You've got to find a different way. So um, I suppose, yeah, I use whiteboards quite a lot. I color code quite a lot. I do kind of a lot of pacing of my bedroom and speaking out loud, which I would never have done for a biomed degree. Um, so I've taken some advice from people in that sense. But I think one thing I've personally struggled with is this. There's a lot of chat about flashcards, and so I've tried them, and I feel like they don't work for me. And
Mhm.
it's kind of trying to taking people's advice is obviously always good, and especially when they've gone through like further years and things. But it is your own way of learning is your own way of learning. So it's always going to be a process, and it's going to take time to find out.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, no, I used to just repeat things, and I've realized there's not enough hours in the day.
There's not enough pens and paper in the world. I think if every med student was repeating, writing everything out over and over again. Yeah, I tried Anki and flashcards, but I couldn't get on with it either. So I am also part of the kind of the non-flashcard group, which I would say it feels like is in the minority.
Mm-hmm.
You could try them, give things a try. And I think that's quite nice about the length of med school. And I'm not sure how kind of you're feeling from year 1 to 2. I feel like the stuff just keeps layering back on top of each other. So the same themes,
Yeah,
content kind of keeps sitting on top of each other, and you kind of just go a bit further or bring in a different element each time. So you do get that chance to build on your knowledge, but it also means that you kind of have to remember the stuff at the bottom to layer on top of it. But you
yeah,
just find your way, and you get a chance to practice a bit on the way and see what works for you.
Yeah, and I think it's the other thing that I found challenging is thinking that I have to know everything about every topic, and
Mhm,
learning what sort of facts are what they call high yield, like super important facts versus not. I feel like that's a massive part of the process, and knowing what kinds of questions come up in exams or what the focus is sometimes quite difficult.
mhm,
Um, so that's been a whole learning curve. But yeah, it is good that it kind of builds on um, previous stuff, and it also gives you an opportunity to recap. So when
mhm,
it comes to repetition, it does actually happen. It just happens in a sort of different way.
yeah,
So yeah, no, it's just very different from the first degree. And I think a few of my friends were like, "Oh, you know, you'll be a little step ahead," and I've just realized you're really not
mhm.
in a lot of it. So
Yeah, yeah, the biochemistry that I learnt, I think again it's the principles of being able to learn something,
mm,
understand it, and maybe take
apply it.
yeah, I think that's a
Yeah,
skill, but the actual details of the molecular systems I learnt, I can't say that many of them are still with me today. But being able to, I think also just the language, the science languages,
yeah,
so many terms, and I think that's definitely
yeah,
an advantage. Um, but yeah, in terms of the nitty-gritty, not so much of it has moved across. And even the bits I have remembered aren't, I would say, of huge interest to everyone when
yeah,
you try and share
yeah,
some
for sure.
knowledge.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, hopefully as like maybe now, obviously we're really general as students, carving out a bit of a niche going forward as you know careers and education progresses. I might try to get some more biochemistry back in.
Mhm.
But yeah, people in CBL did not appreciate.
I'm sure.
Yeah. And are there many other grads on your course?
You know what? More than I thought there would be.
Mhm,
Yeah, more than I thought there would be. I think I want to say Glasgow is roughly a 10%
mhm,
grads, 90% school
mhm,
leaver course. And I think I've been really lucky because I think a lot of us have gravitated towards each other.
mhm,
Um, I know for my masters, I think everyone kind of had their, they kind of had their friend groups, and so yes, like we were a class and we did things together, but there was less of everyone kind of had their own thing going on in the background. Whereas I feel like a lot of the grads at Glasgow, we very naturally came together, and we're actually a really quite close knit group, I think, which is really nice. It was definitely something that I was worried about
mhm,
coming in going back to uni
mhm.
as a graduate.
Yeah, and it was easier when my first year was the year before COVID, and we graduated in the lecture theatre together as a, visually a bit identifiable, perhaps. But I think it must have been a huge challenge in kind of if you don't have that communal group learning to find each other, did
Yeah.
you, was it during kind of classes and teaching that you came together, or was there some sort of event?
Um, so I think we've just kind of all it's kind of been like a chain reaction. So I think a few of us found each other and we started a group and then found more. But it
Mhm,
was quite quick. I thought it might take like the year perhaps to seek each other out, but it was quite a quick kind of um, gathering. We did try at the start of the course. We did try and meet up, but of course we did at that time have a lot going on between us, so we weren't able to,
yeah.
but we were the group chat, so to speak. We were aware that that each other were there, and that was nice. That
Mhm,
was really good. Um, but yeah, no, I think there's quite a few of us. I'm yet to meet everybody because it's quite a big course in Glasgow, but no, it is good. It's nice, and it's not just grads that have come straight from their undergrad. It's really interesting and I didn't think there would be that many that had full careers beforehand.
mhm,
So that's really nice about Glasgow as well. It really is the kind of graduate medic community is so diverse,
mhm,
and that's really cool. We can really lean on each other for that.
mhm.
And yeah,
I think it's nice, even if people tend to start having maybe more things going on outside of the course and more independent lives, perhaps. But just I think knowing that there's other people that are there. You know, you might have a kind of a face in teaching that's not all people at a very different time in their life. I think even just that sense of knowing there's other people in itself is quite reassuring. You know, I'd say it's
Yeah.
similar with the mature medic community here. The socials are quite difficult to organise because people just have a lot going on. But I think that's almost what's quite nice about it, is everyone's okay in their own little bubbles, and it's just nice that people know that if they do need, there is, you know, support or just
Yeah.
someone that can, you know, empathise with the situation a bit more.
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
So a few questions that have come in for people. So someone has asked, what's the biggest thing medicine is teaching you?
Oh my goodness. um, Gosh, what's the biggest thing medicine is teaching me? Um, I think the biggest thing at the moment that
Mhm,
we're learning is that actually a lot of medicine is in the interpersonal skills.
mhm,
Um, and it's kind of causing a lot of us to be like, oh, well, they spend so long teaching us about, biology, cells, drugs, liver enzymes, whatever it is. But actually, a lot of what it is to be a good doctor is how you form trust with your patients, how you communicate,
mhm,
um, and how you treat them, and take into account all aspects of their life.
mhm,
I think you often hear it said that being doing medicine is a very big privilege, which it is absolutely. Um, but I guess it's that when you meet people from all aspects, that's really when it kind of is drilled home of
mhm,
how yeah of how much of a interpersonal job medicine really is. I think
mhm.
that's the biggest thing that's taught me so far. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. No, I think it's that's quite a hard element that doesn't necessarily come across, you know, especially when you're at school and you're thinking about medicine.
mm,
You know, you're generally, my impression is that, you know, students are generally told if you're academically very capable, you know, you should do medicine, and the focus is a lot on the academics.
yeah,
I think it's maybe got a bit out of touch of trying to really hone in on the people skills and people that are interested in the humanities. And you know, it is an academic
yeah,
course, you can't get away from that, but you know, a lot of that, you know, that's learned, and you can learn communication, but it's that drive to want to connect with people and want to
hmm,
understand and want to help that I think perhaps you kind of need just to have there. um
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I think
And
you
I
can.
think I think you're right. I think a lot of the stuff you can be taught, and again, it goes back to that reality that you're not going to learn it all. I
Mhm,
think yeah, you can recall all of the facts, but actually, when your patient's in front of you, it's never going to be a textbook
mhm,
scenario.
mhm,
So really, the great skill is trying to navigate or unpick things, and then find yeah find ways to help intervene,
mhm,
signpost, and
mhm,
obviously address the issue at hand. But
mhm.
um, yeah, it's never a simple scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you could have all the knowledge in the world, but if you can't understand that person's perspective or what
Yeah,
they want from it or what they're worried about, even if you do the textbook medical management or the exact right
yeah,
prescribing, it's not
yeah,
going to make as big a difference to them
yeah.
as if you were able to really, you know, understand and make a connection. You know, that goes without saying, obviously, there's someone's having, you know, a heart attack, you need to give the right drugs and you need to do the right management. And that
100%.
is going to save their life. So, you know, but I think beyond that, you know, that's a very specific scenario. And actually a lot of
Mhm.
it's just trying to understand other people's perspectives and um, making that connection. Otherwise, they don't really care if you know all the class
Yeah,
particular drug.
yeah,
Um, they obviously want the right one, but yeah, so I think that's a really great perspective to share for people. either kind of doing medicine or thinking about it? Perfect. What a great question. Um,
Yeah.
so another one has, what has been the most surprising thing about being a med student?
What has been the most surprising thing about being a med
Mm,
student? Um, Again, like I'm trying to unpick what they mean by what the most surprising thing
yeah.
is.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, what has been most surprising about now being a med student?
oh my goodness, Amber. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, most surprising. I mean, I perhaps how quickly people assume that you know knowledge.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
I think it starts on, you joke about it. It's one of those things you joke about
Mhm.
with friends. Are like, oh, when you become a med student, we're going to ask you all the questions, but it literally happens. That
Yeah.
literally happens. I think I wasn't prepared. I was prepared for that maybe when I got to fourth or fifth year. I was like, I'm sure
Mhm.
people will start asking me things.
Mhm.
But second year, I'm like, oh gosh, you're really going in and trying to ex- not expecting me to know, but like assuming I would or I might.
Mhm.
Um, Perhaps that's it. As I say, I've had that a few times already, and I think it's perhaps not surprising because I did expect it, but it's you feel like you do actually feel quite. I feel quite a responsibility
Mhm.
in thinking, right, I've got, maybe I do need to know that, maybe if that's what I'm going to be faced with, this is what I've got to prepare myself for.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say
Yeah. Yeah.
really just preparing yourself for being asked lots of questions about things. And
I suppose people's
that's,
expectations
yeah.
of what your knowledge level is. And then people, when you say, oh, I'm not sure about that, they go, oh, you're supposed to be the doctor. And you're like,
Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
mean instant encyclopedic knowledge. And I think it really tests the boundary of, well, of saying, oh, I'm really not sure about that. You know,
Yeah.
I'll go, I can look it up here, because it is that expectation of that you have the knowledge is a really hard thing to sit with if you feel maybe that people won't take you as seriously if you don't know all those answers. And actually,
Yeah.
saying, well, actually, I don't know that, can can feel like you're not, like you said, you expected to know, and is this what I should know? Whereas really, like we said, you're never going to know everything.
No.
The kind of how will it change people's perspective of you if you don't know?
Yeah.
The kind of fallacy of a doctor, and they know everything and they never do anything wrong, is a harmful stereotype, I think, sometimes to live up to.
I think it does put a lot of pressure on
Mhm.
medical students. And at the end of the day, I think, I often remind myself, I'm like, right, I have my whole career is going to be like this. I've got to get used to not knowing everything all the time.
Mhm.
And as you say, it's really about knowing where to go if you don't know, and how you navigate conversations
Mhm.
when you've got, in future years for me, when
Mhm.
you've got a patient in front of you, and how you communicate that
Mhm. Yeah.
is a skill in itself.
Yeah, massively. While kind of maintaining trust and professionalism, but
Yeah.
actually, it's like no, not appropriate to pretend you know everything. Um,
Yeah.
and I think as well, before medicine, if someone asked me a health related question, just not because they necessarily thought I could answer it, but they were just asking, I would jump in with all sorts of ideas. Oh, this is what you need to do. Maybe look at this. But now the title of medical student and
Hmm.
doctor, I suddenly feel I can't throw anything around because I'm worried that it's
Yeah.
not the right advice, and it's not. I don't want to stop them going to actually seek help, and it's really changed the way I navigate those conversations, and it definitely feels a lot of pressure to not, because these are the people closer to you, and you
Yeah.
feel like you feel a responsibility to the information you impart. So yeah, I think it's not something that we really get. Well, I haven't necessarily at Bristol, and I think spent much time discussing it or had teaching on it and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's that um, kind of thought of like, or kind of reminding yourself like when you're in the hospital, you do have more people you can ask.
Mhm.
So whilst I think sometimes I get quite caught up in, oh, I've got to remember this because what am I going to do when I get to placement and someone quizzes me? You just,
Mhm.
I don't know. I think it is just accepting that sometimes,
Mhm.
and being okay with that, and knowing that that doesn't mean that you're not a good doctor or you're behind, because it doesn't. Everyone
Mhm.
has that experience. I think everyone feels that pressure.
Mhm. And everyone's got a different, you know, knowledge base. It's like, oh, I
Yeah,
don't know this answer. There's, in
I do
yourself,
know other things.
yeah, you
Yeah,
should trust that you know other things, not necessarily
yeah,
things that in that scenario will help or they'll necessarily care about, but it's that backing yourself and the confidence to be like, well, I don't know
yeah,
this, and maybe it's highlighting a bit of a gap that I need to go and follow up on, but
yeah.
I'm doing okay. I know other things.
Yeah. And that's
Mm.
a positive thing, is knowing what you don't know and
Mhm.
following that up. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's only down new avenues.
In hindsight, it's fine. In sometimes there's some situations where it comes about that yeah, not always as fun, but yeah,
Yeah.
definitely as a whole picture, it's okay to not know everything.
Mhm.
So moving a bit away from the academics, we have a question of what is the work-life balance like with your hobbies? And they are also a long distance runner. So
Yeah.
ah,
Um, I think I've got there with trying to get the work-life balance. I think for me and my long distance running, setting goals in that has
mhm,
helped, because I have to stick to, I don't have to, but I really want to stick to those goals as well. Um, and I think, yeah, as I've said, it allows me to de-stress. It's something that I set goals for, but don't put pressure on. I'm not trying to get to the Olympics. I just, kind of play about, you have flexibility, but still have an end goal in sight.
mhm,
Um, and I think that's an important thing to have. And I think it's important to see the goal, like see your goal of passing your exams and getting through medical school as an equal goal
mhm,
to your hobby, or to your, what you want from that. And that's really, yeah, I think that's really helped me maintain the work-life balance.
mhm,
um yeah, but it can be really difficult when you, especially at certain times when you've got a really intense week of lectures versus a less intense week, or you've got a lab one week or not. So sometimes it's more equal than others, but I think it's always, yeah, I think it's important to plan that out as much as you plan anything else out. Um, and at the end of the day, for me, I think it's beneficial, because at the end of the day, if I don't go and do my exercise, don't go and run, I'm not going to be in the right headspace for medicine. So it's actually, as I say, that's kind of what's made me realize that
mhm.
both are as important as the other, um, throughout term, especially throughout term time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you kind of your way of getting that balance is creating goals. And I'd say I'm
Mm.
quite similar in that I like a set out, a goal. And I read some narratives that I suppose that kind of your relaxed time should be, relaxing, and you should have time to
Mhm.
really, I suppose, relax or do have something that's not driven by a target or a goal, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, yeah,
I suppose it's knowing how you work and what you enjoy. And I say, and like you said, the big thing is about that pressure. There's no necessarily pressure on that goal, but just giving yourself something to make sure you get it in um, is important.
yes, yeah. Um, and yeah, you're right though, kind of having that time to just sit. That's that
Mhm.
is that's still something I struggle with, to be honest. Um, but yeah, it's taking the stress out of the other goals that I think is the key thing. Um, so that I don't, I guess, so that I don't uh, feel like I've not achieved in
Mhm.
that. Um, I think that's a really important perspective to keep for
Yeah,
me.
yeah. And I suppose not always easy to manage that expectation if you are saying, I want to either run this distance or this speed at this point. If
Mm.
there, that, you know, could be difficult if that's what you were aiming for, but also
Yeah.
without those goals, maybe a bit harder to get that, like, focus in on getting it done.
Yeah, maintaining the motivation to keep doing it.
Mhm.
And you do need it. You do need it. You know, you have days where you just kind of want to, you've had a long day at uni and you want to kind of have nothing on.
Mhm.
Um, Even though, you know, kind of, for me anyway, I know that going out and getting my run done, yeah, it's exhausting, but it's good for me in a lot of ways. So kind of, yeah, keeping that as a in the back of my mind as a
Mhm.
way of motivating myself to do it.
Yeah, so you can always, you can know what's good for you, but it's not
Mhm.
always to,
It's not always what you want to do.
yeah. But
Yeah.
yes, I think that can be quite a confusing concept for people, in that,
Mhm.
you know, if something's good for you, you kind of maybe have a sense that you'd always be rushing to do it and it'd always be an easy
Yeah.
decision to make to do it. You know, I know that if I get up at 6:30, I feel so much more awake than if I get up at, you know, 8. But do I
Yeah.
always up at that time? No way. Like, you know, I'll try and convince
Yeah.
my head so many reasons why, you know, and actually sometimes you do need more sleep, but I know that I feel great when I wake up at that time, but
Yeah.
I just don't, I say I don't always do it. I, you know, quite regularly don't
Yeah.
do it. And it's such a silly, it's a counterintuitive
Mhm.
thing. But I think that's the difference between, I suppose, motivation and habit, would you say?
And habit, yeah. And I think once something becomes a habit, you do get to the point where if you don't do it, it's also impacts you. So
Mm.
I think that's the nice thing for me now, is that running is such a habit that
Mhm.
I go, and it becomes, it obviously has to change when I go and how long I go for, but I go, and it's yeah, I'm glad, I'm really glad I've got that. Um, but yeah, it can get tiring.
Yeah. I suppose it's maybe something for people to think about if they're struggling to get extracurricular, well, I suppose not extracurricular, it's time away from course studying,
Mm,
whatever it is that you enjoy. It sounds maybe like you're turning it into a task, but some sort of
yeah,
to, you know, maybe out like pages read or books read, or even episodes, you know, like series read, you know, to
yeah,
finish a series, you know, every month or something like that. I don't know. I work quite well with a goal and a, like, especially if you get to tick it off at the end that you've done it, or some sort of measure. Um, but whether everyone would agree that that aligns perfectly with relaxing or downtime.
yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, so we're at the time to talk about your question of the episode.
Okay.
So your question centered around my favorite cuisine of Italian food. So your question is olives or sun-dried tomatoes as an appetizer before a good Italian.
Mhm.
So yeah, what's your vote for that?
Definitely sun-dried tomatoes.
Okay. Yeah.
Definitely sun-dried tomatoes. Although the number of Italian kind of evenings I've had where the people that I'm with are like, right, we're getting olives straight off the back. I'm like, oh, I think I might be in the minority with sun-dried tomatoes. So it'll be interesting to see what people say.
Yeah, I'm very much also in that camp. I'm not an olive fan. Um,
No?
yeah, I feel like people say you'll grow into them, and you know you just have to try them. People that eat olives seem very passionate about other people wanting to eat olives. I've generally found.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, me too. And I've tried multiple times. I've not given up on that one, but I just can't. It's
yeah,
not gonna, it's not gonna
yeah,
happen, guys.
yeah. And I mean, you for the massive amount of pasta that will probably be arriving in an Italian meal anyway, so
Exactly.
can't be filling up on olives. Perfect. We'll put that to the audience. See if we get any polarizing thoughts. Maybe do a little poll or something. Get people's thoughts, and then for our next episode, we'll open up with that, so we'll get to see what everyone thinks. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been so interesting hearing about your story and your views on medicine and how you're finding it. And I'm excited for you to get into your clinical years, really get to clinical medicine, and I'm sure you know you'll be an amazing doctor in a few years' time. So thank you for your time, and we'll put some more details in the episode below of how people can follow you along.
Amazing. Thank you for the questions, and thank you, Amber, too. It's been lovely to chat.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for questions for everyone sending them in, and keep them coming for the next episodes.
Amazing. See you.